At exactly 3:15 local time, under a moonless sky above the Persian Gulf, an F-35C known by the call sign Viper 1 was moving in full stealth configuration. The aircraft maintained complete radio silence as it closed in on the Iranian coastline, still 120 nautical miles from shore. Its objective was OGAB-44, a $2.5 billion underground airbase carved deep into the granite mountains. But then, without warning, the pilot's helmet display came alive. The radar warning receiver erupted with alerts. 6 separate hardlock signals appeared at once. S-400 Triumph and Bavar 373 fire control radars had somehow detected and targeted the most advanced stealth fighter in the world. On paper, this should not have been possible. The preliminary cyber operation was supposed to blind Iran's early warning network before the mission even began. Instead, the exact opposite was happening. And within just 90 seconds, 40 Sayed-4B hypersonic interceptors would be ready to launch, putting America's billion-dollar stealth icon in extreme danger above the Persian Gulf. But Iran had made one critical mistake. While every sensor and operator was focused on the F-35, they failed to notice what was flying just 300 meters away at 45,000 feet. It looked like an ordinary commercial airliner. Its call sign was Ghost Rider. And in complete silence, it was activating a classified system that had never been publicly revealed before. This hidden technology was America's real trump card tonight, and it could decide the balance of power across the Middle East. So what exactly was this system? How could a slow aircraft, shaped like a civilian jet, change the entire outcome of the operation? The answer, revealed over the next 13 minutes, may completely change the way you understand modern combat. Iran's confidence that night was not based on empty pride. It was built on a fortress of concrete, deception, and one of the most carefully prepared defensive traps of the 21st century. The American target, OGAB-44, was not simply a runway hidden underground. It was a subterranean military city designed to survive even the most powerful bunker-penetrating weapons. Inside were more than 200 upgraded Shahed 136 drone variants, Su-35 Flanker E fighters recently transferred from Russia, and a large stockpile of medium-range ballistic missiles waiting in reserve. To clear the path for the F-35s, U.S. Cyber Command had launched a massive digital offensive 48 hours earlier. Millions of lines of hostile code were quietly inserted into Iran's national power grid and radar infrastructure. At the Pentagon, operators watched as status lights representing Iran's air defense network turned red one by one. To the Americans, that meant the systems had gone offline. They believed Iran had been digitally blinded before the first aircraft entered the danger zone. But they had underestimated Tehran. Iran had expected this move. The systems the United States attacked were not the real defense network. They were a digital decoy, a carefully built honeypot designed to absorb the strike while the actual defenses protecting OGAB-44 remained untouched. Iran had used a simple but highly effective solution: air gapping. Every S-400 and Bavar 373 launcher around the base had been completely disconnected from the public internet and the national power grid. Instead, the batteries operated inside a sealed internal network, exchanging data through fiber optic lines buried 10 meters underground. That made them nearly impossible to affect with remote digital tools. But Iran did not only preserve its defenses, it changed the way it tracked its target. All active radars, which normally send out signals and can reveal their positions, were switched off. Instead, Iran quietly activated an upgraded Kuga passive sensor network, supported by powerful electro-optical reconnaissance systems spread across the peaks of the Zagros Mountains. This network did not broadcast anything. It listened, it watched, it searched for tiny disturbances in the air and faint infrared traces from the F-35's engines against the freezing night sky. And slowly, the invisible aircraft began to appear. For nearly 20 minutes, Viper 1 had been tracked without realizing it. Iran waited with remarkable patience, maintaining total emissions control and keeping every major system silent. Not a single unnecessary signal was sent into the night sky. Only when the F-35 entered the engagement zone, where turning back would be nearly impossible, did Iran bring the S-400 fire control radar online for the decisive moment. It was a carefully designed trap. Draw the aircraft deeper, limit its escape routes, then reveal the full defense network at the exact right second. Iran believed it had cornered the F-35. But that confidence was about to be challenged. Comment USA below if you are ready to see how the U.S. Navy responds when one of its most advanced aircraft is placed in danger. Now return to 0315 hours. The moment the target lock warning appeared, the Combined Air Operations Center in Qatar immediately activated Plan B. Commanders did not rush to send Ghost Rider, their most valuable hidden asset, directly into the danger zone without first understanding the situation. Instead, they called in the aircraft built specifically for this kind of frontline crisis. Two EA-18G Growler electronic warfare squadrons launched from the deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford. Within moments, both squadrons accelerated into position and activated their ALQ-218 receivers and high-powered jamming pods at maximum output. A massive barrier of electronic interference spread across the battlespace, designed to overwhelm Iran's fire control radars and disrupt their ability to maintain a steady lock. At the same time, the newest generation of AGM-88G AARGM-ER anti-radiation missiles left their launch rails. Traveling at supersonic speed, they followed the very radar signals Iran had aimed at the F-35s, tracing those emissions back toward their source. The objective was simple: force the radar stations to shut down immediately or risk being neutralized. For the first 5 minutes, the tactic appeared to work perfectly. The warning indicators on the F-35 pilots' displays vanished. Iran's radio communications seemed to collapse under the pressure of intense jamming. The AGM-88G missiles raced toward transmission points hidden in remote mountain valleys, triggering powerful impacts that shook the surrounding ridgelines. The F-35C formation regained control of the situation, continued deeper into hostile airspace, and prepared to reach the coordinates where GBU-53 Stormbreaker smart glide bombs would be released toward the underground tunnel entrances. Inside the command center in Qatar, American officers began to relax. For a moment, it looked as if the Growlers had taken control of the electromagnetic battlefield. But once again, they had underestimated how carefully Iran had prepared. The sudden silence from Iran's air defense network was not a collapse. It was discipline. It was the quiet part of a trap that had not yet fully closed. Just as the American formation reached the point of no return, the real defense plan came alive. The S-400 radar sites targeted by the Growlers were not the true heart of Iran's system. They were expendable decoy emitters placed there to draw out the American response and reveal how the U.S. Navy would react. Meanwhile, Iran's real defensive network remained untouched. The domestically produced Bavar, 373, and Khordad-15 missile complexes were still hidden, still silent, and still waiting for the perfect moment to appear. In reality, Iran had not relied on radar for the early stages of tracking at all. Instead, it used an electro-optical and infrared observation network spread across the highest mountain peaks. These systems quietly watched the sky and sent visual data through buried fiber optic lines directly to an underground command center. Because no radio waves were being used to lock onto the targets, the warning systems on the Growlers had almost nothing to detect. The anti-radiation missiles also had no clear signal source to follow. Then, without warning, the night above the mountains came alive. Dozens of bright trails rose from hidden openings in the rocky terrain as Sayyad 4B interceptors climbed into the sky at incredible speed. These missiles did not need constant radar guidance at launch. They followed preloaded coordinates calculated by the optical network using inertial navigation during most of their flight. Only in the final moments would their onboard seekers activate to refine the approach. The Growlers, focused on disrupting radar frequencies, were suddenly facing a threat that did not behave like a traditional radar-guided system. The two F-35s had no choice but to break formation. Flares scattered behind them as the pilots pulled extreme maneuvers, pushing their aircraft to the limits in an attempt to avoid the incoming interceptors. The American formation was thrown into disorder, and then the situation became even more serious. Early warning satellites detected the massive doors of the OGAB-44 underground base beginning to open. Iran was preparing to launch a large wave of ballistic missiles and drones at the exact moment the U.S. formation was struggling to regain control. If the United States ordered a withdrawal now to protect its aircraft, the Fifth Fleet could be left exposed to a major strike launched from deep inside the mountains. For the first time in decades, American commanders were facing the possibility of a major tactical setback. And that was the moment Ghost Rider stepped out of the shadows. The aircraft that looked like a civilian jet was, in fact, the EA-37B Compass Call. While the fighters were maneuvering under pressure, the EA-37B remained calm at the edge of international airspace, closely supported by an RC-135 rivet joint. Unlike the EA-18G Growler, which relies on overwhelming electronic power, the EA-37B operates with far more precision. It represents a new generation of cognitive electronic warfare. Its mission was not to overpower radars or chase missiles. Its target was something Iran believed was protected: the internal command links connecting its missile batteries, launch units, and underground control centers. Iran had buried its fiber optic cables to prevent outside interception. But there was one weakness they could not fully eliminate, At the connection points between underground systems and mobile launch platforms, the network could not remain perfectly sealed. Signal converters, control equipment, and metal junctions can release tiny electromagnetic traces. To most systems, those traces are invisible, but not to the RC-135. Using its highly sensitive antenna array, the rivet joint detected the faint electronic signature coming from the desert below. That signal was enough for Ghost Rider to begin its work. Inside the EA-37B, an advanced software suite known as SWORD started analyzing the pattern. With the help of artificial intelligence, it searched for the smallest openings in Iran's command flow. Then it began the operation. Not with brute force, not with noise, but with subtle deception. Ghost data began slipping into the information stream, quietly altering what the Iranian missile batteries believed they were seeing in real time. The launch system started receiving commands that were just slightly out of sync. Targeting information began to shift by a small but critical margin. On paper, everything still looked normal to the operators, but inside the system, precision was fading. This was the perfect non-kinetic response. The United States did not need to directly engage every missile. Instead, it used Iran's own command network against itself, turning a carefully coordinated defense system into a source of confusion. And in modern warfare, a tiny error at the wrong second can change everything. But there was one serious problem. To reach Iran's tightly protected defense network with enough signal strength to interfere with the original data flow, the EA-37B could no longer remain at a safe distance. Ghost Rider had to move closer. The SWORD system needed to operate from within roughly 150 miles to push through Iran's physical security layer and reach the vulnerable points in the command network. It was an incredibly high-risk decision. The EA-37B was built from a Gulfstream G550 business jet airframe. It had no stealth shaping, no supersonic speed, and no traditional air-to-air weapons for self-defense. The 7 crew members on board understood exactly what that meant. By moving forward, they were placing themselves directly inside the reach of Iran's long-range air defense network. And the moment the EA-37B crossed into the danger zone, Iran noticed. Its passive detection systems picked up the unusual change in the electromagnetic environment. Deep inside the OGAB-44 underground command bunker, Iranian commanders realized something shocking. The true threat was not the F-35s. It was the aircraft that looked like a civilian jet, slowly moving toward their protected network. Within seconds, Iran gave the order to activate a reserve S-300 PMU-2 battery that had remained hidden until that moment. Its mission was clear: focus entirely on Ghost Rider. 248N6E-3 interceptors rose from their launches and accelerated through the night sky at extreme speed, racing toward the electronic warfare aircraft. On board the EA-37B, the crew had only seconds to react. The electronic warfare officer activated the aircraft's side-mounted AESA emitter system at full power. But Ghost Rider was not trying to physically stop the incoming missiles. Instead, it aimed a focused electronic beam toward the missile data link antennas and the ground control station, while flooding the OGAB-44 network with waves of false coordinate data. The battle had turned into a race measured in milliseconds. Could the EA-37B disrupt Iran's fire control chain quickly enough to make the interceptors lose their solution? Or would the missiles reach the aircraft before the system could finish its work? At 5 nautical miles, the situation looked impossible. A converted business jet could not outmaneuver missiles traveling at such speed. There was no room for a dramatic escape. No sharp turn could save it. No burst of speed could carry it away. Then, at the last possible moment, something changed. The seekers inside the incoming missiles began receiving conflicting information. Their onboard systems could no longer match the target they were tracking with the coordinates coming from the ground network. For a fraction of a second, the missiles hesitated. And in modern air combat, a fraction of a second can be the difference between a direct intercept and a failed approach. The data coming from the command center no longer matched what the missile's onboard seekers were seeing. Because of the EA-37B's electronic deception, the interceptors were receiving 2 different versions of reality at the same time. Their safety logic interpreted the conflict as a possible outside takeover attempt. A moment later, both missiles broke apart harmlessly in the night sky. The shockwave rolled past the fragile G550-based airframe, but Ghost Rider stayed in the air. At that exact moment, Iran's integrated air defense network began to lose coordination. Mobile launch units received conflicting instructions. Some systems paused. Others turned in the wrong direction, searching for targets that were no longer where the network claimed they should be. Radar stations lost synchronization with command nodes. Data links began reporting different positions for the same aircraft. And then came the most important effect of all. The hydraulic control software managing the massive OGAB-44 bunker doors froze after receiving corrupted timing data introduced by the EA-37B. The doors stopped moving halfway open. For the United States, that created a narrow window, 120 seconds. 2 minutes in which Iran's defense network was confused, delayed, and unable to respond as one system. Taking advantage of that brief opening, a squadron of F-15EX Eagle IIs approached from the rear at extreme speed. These aircraft were not there to flatten the mountain. OGAB-44 was too heavily reinforced for that. Their goal was far more precise. They released 4 5,000-pound GBU-72/B bunker-penetrating weapons directly toward the jammed door gaps and ventilation access points of the underground complex. The impacts sealed the exposed exits and damaged the access routes leading into the mountain. OGAB-44 still existed. Its inner structure had not vanished, but functionally it had been taken out of the fight. Aircraft inside could not take off. Drone systems could not deploy. The base had been transformed from a hidden fortress into a massive concrete trap. The United States had not erased Iran's military power. Tehran still had other bases, other launch sites, and thousands of missiles spread across the country. But the strategic message was impossible to miss. America did not need to level an entire mountain to change the outcome. It only needed to make the mountain stop working. As dawn began to rise over the Persian Gulf, the EA-37B Ghost Rider turned back toward Al Udeid Air Base, leaving behind a battlefield that had become strangely quiet. A full-scale regional conflict had been avoided. But something even more important had begun. A new era of electronic warfare had arrived, where invisible signals, corrupted data, and lines of code could matter more than firepower. Iran's deepest fear was not simply the loss of one underground base. It was the realization that the United States may have found a way to reach the nervous system of its defense network. And once an enemy can touch the nervous system, every fortress becomes vulnerable.